And I didn't expect this conversation to get so deeply esoteric and religious, but perhaps I should have known you better. But I think it's really interesting that we can take these different interpretations, and still, the world turns, and still, it's okay. We're allowed to believe these different things. It's fine.
Absolutely, man. I mean, listen, I can fully say that we're on the same page as far as that is concerned, and I think that sometimes as humans we sort of lose the plot by focusing too much on what other people think rather than just having strength
Absolutely.
in what we believe in. If you believe in something strongly enough, even if you're the only person in the world who truly believes that, that's okay. At least that's the way I look at it.
Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a new episode of Iblis Manifestations Podcast. It has been a while, but I'm very glad to be back with you on here. Today's episode features a very special guest by the name of Mr. Mark Deeks. Mark is the creative force behind the doom metal project from Northumbria in England called Arth. Now, he is someone whose work is relatively new as far as his own original work that he's been composing and publishing with the name Arth. However, it would be clear to many of us that this is work that has already created a lot of ripples. Okay, and there's a very good reason for that, and it's because that his project is one that, first of all, has a very unique concept, and that is, of course, a concept that's about the Saint Cuthbert of Northumbria. I get it, a Christian saint. So we got to discuss a lot about that and why he even chose this concept, and what was the meaning behind that. What's his personal stance on the topic of religion and so on. And we, of course, in typical Iblis Manifestations fashion, got straight down into the spiritual and the esoteric. But also what I found to be very valuable about my conversation with Mark was him sharing a very valuable and just really deep insight into his own personal life and certain events which transpired, which may have actually inspired what he does with his musical project now. I won't give away too much of that just yet, but all I can say is that I very much appreciated how honest and how candid and how open he was about his experiences. So shortly we'll be coming that, and yeah, I could not recommend this one enough to you guys. I'm sure that you will really enjoy it. And yeah, we also got to discuss topics of parenthood and things like that, which I think are very important. So shortly we'll be coming my conversation with Mark, and yeah, if you're new to Iblis Manifestations, well, first of all, welcome. We have a lot of deep, nuanced conversations in the long format of podcasting with a lot of very special guests and artists, predominantly from the underground world, as you may have noticed. And these conversations aren't always limited to just music. In fact, a majority of them tend to be about other aspects and areas of life, and generally the perspectives that these artists hold. And with myself also being a musical artist, I think that it always creates for an interesting chemistry. So that's generally the idea of the podcast. So If you haven't already done so, then please feel free to subscribe. And if you like the content, please share it around. And most importantly, do let us know your thoughts and feedback. I do pay attention to that. And I'd like to also add an extra note for those of you who have been listening to Iblis Manifestations. My band Trivax recently performed at the Cosmic Void Festival in London. And honestly, I am humbled and truly taken aback by how many of you people came up to me and shared feedback about the podcast. So not just the work of Trivax, but obviously it was fantastic to get to meet so many of you out there. It's always good because with the work of Iblis Manifestations, with it being an online thing, really, I don't, other than the comments and the abundance of private messages that I tend to receive on these podcast episodes, I don't really get the opportunity to interact with you guys in person unless Trivax is doing some live shows. So it's really great when that opportunity arises and I get to meet some of you. So thank you to everyone who came and said hello at the Cosmic Void, even if it was just a quick, small handshake and some regards. I really, really appreciate every single one of those. So, with that out of the way, I think that pretty much covers us for the introductions for this episode. So, if you enjoy what we do, feel free to share it around. And Trivax's new album will be coming out very soon on the 29th of September. It's called Eloah Burns Out, and it will be out via Cold Never Dies. And I think it's our best work yet. So if you like your black and death metal, and if you like it with with a big fucking punch, but you also like moments of melancholy and retrospect, then this is gonna be the album for you. But anyhow, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us once again on Iblis Manifestations. It's good to be back. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please welcome Mark Deeks to Iblis Manifestations.
All right, Mark, good evening, my friend, and welcome to Iblis Manifestations. What a privilege to have you on here. How are you doing tonight?
I'm all right, man. Thanks for having me on. And I just had a few days off with the family, so back to it.
Back to normal. Right. So let's just start by saying that, obviously, I had the privilege of actually seeing our very first live performance last year in Manchester, because we got to share the stage together. Obviously with both Ard and Winterfylleth, and obviously there's a few shared members there, just a few, and so that was a really special event. And I just gotta say to you, man, personally speaking, I've never been a doom metal guy. I've always been of the school of thought that, oh yeah, so since 2006 onwards, Monotheist was released, so there's not much point listening to much else that is doom. But honestly, I have enjoyed your record so much, and especially I was listening to it today, and I was like, man, this is good. Like, just the atmosphere, it really draws you in, and it is especially inspiring, just from the concept of it, really. So I was thinking to myself, what we can do is probably just to start things off of here. We can probably just go straight into it and start talking about the story of Saint Cuthbert, and maybe that can be a good point to start things off and then get into it. So, tell us a little bit about this very interesting saint that you decided to build basically an entire album around.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you. The thing with Northumbria, where I'm from, is that it's kind of impossible to talk about the history of this region without getting into religion somehow. And straight off the bat, I am not a religious person. I come from a very religious family. Like the vast majority of my family is a very religious family, but I would consider myself probably an atheist. So I'm like immediately the black sheep.
Sure.
But I've got a really interest, like a lot of metal musicians have had in recent years, of how musicians represent where they're from. I think it's really interesting when musicians try and inject part of their culture, be it the landscape, be it their folk music of their region, be it historical texts or whatever. I just think it opens up lots of possibilities of discovering interesting things that you wouldn't have discovered otherwise. So, whether I'm listening to, bands from Ukraine or bands from Scandinavia or bands from Ireland or whatever, when you come across a band that's got something to say or stories to tell, there's just immediately something you can almost like hang your hat on a bit. Because even though it's not our own culture, we often can sort of identify with tales from other places, and there's often a sort of a common thread that one culture might learn from another or identify with from another. So when it came to like what was I going to write art about, for me, I guess for those of you not from the northeast of England, there's always a huge passionate history of people from the northeast of England being really passionate about where they're from, very proud of where they're from. And of course, like lots of bands who have elements of, as soon as you start talking about national pride or regional pride or whatever, you sort of immediately start trying to traverse this very risky terrain of people assuming you to be something that you're not. And I just wanted to tell stories of where I'm from because I think they're really interesting. And there's also kinds of, from a really sort of flippant point of view, there's battles and kings and castles and more battles and bits of magic and legends and all kinds of myths that appear around these stories. So I just think that they really suit metal, full stop. And so the fact that it's almost impossible to tell a tale of a time in Northumbria without dealing with religion, I just sort of took it as, so what? Like I didn't have a religious perspective to benefit from because I'm not a religious person. It's what has been interesting more than anything is the range of reactions it's had. And what people have assumed about me as a result of that. Sure. I mean, I've had every extreme from one end of the extreme to the other, which I'm happy to tell you about if you want to know more. But literally, people have assumed everything you could imagine on the basis of me making an album about a Northumbrian saint, which is I think says more about them than it does about me. But yeah, there was nothing more than I want to tell a story about where I'm from.
Of course. Yeah, I've heard you mention this before, and I actually think there's a lot of potency to that, I mean, it goes without saying that we're fully on the same page on this, I mean, everyone knows I never fucking shut up about the fact that I'm from Iran, and, we even use the traditional folk instrument on our most recent single and stuff like that. And I actually think that is very important. And I think that there's this very weird territory when it comes to embracing one's own heritage, especially when you do something like that publicly, because I think because that's still a part of you, with even if you don't like it, it's still a part of you, and I think that you can learn from that a lot more than you would if you were to just completely shun it away and say, oh, that doesn't exist, that's got nothing to do with me. I think I'm very much of I don't know if this is specifically because I'm Persian, and obviously there's a lot of history there that of course I'm fucking proud of, but I don't think I'm the only person who feels that way. But there's this weird sort of guilt associated with that, especially if you're of a heritage that did successfully. Does that make sense? Because obviously there are of course very unfortunate things, related to colonialism or whatever, that you can morally question these things. But also at the same time, I feel that we can learn from these things rather than say that it doesn't exist or you hear some people, especially younger ones, saying like, oh, I hate where I'm from, or and that I don't understand that. That's a very strange thing to me. And and also to the credit of your artistic expressions as well. Having lived over here for 11, 12 years now, when I listened to your record, I put it on this morning, and then we happened to have a fucking good weather today for once. And as soon as I started listening to the record, I was like, I'm envisioning the usual, just the clouds and the rain that you get from here. There's this thing about the atmosphere, and that it's like, it's a very, very abstract concept, but it's true, and it's that just with the sound of melodies and certain notes and certain tempos, you can somehow create images of a certain weather environment. It's very powerful and very just surreal concept, and it's true, it's the same as, for example, like if you listen to Immortal, like At the Heart of Winter, all you're imagining is just Norwegian fucking winter and snow. And there is definitely something very special to that. But what was it specifically about St. Cuthbert that spoke to you personally, that you thought, okay, this is a story that I want to convey? Because I think you've done a really, really great job of it. And I do agree that it actually works very well with the style of music that you've chosen. But what was it about his tale specifically that you wanted to go with?
So honestly, it just suited doom metal so much, because the central part of the story, we have a tale of this hermit and this healer who has a premonition of his death. He tells his followers that he doesn't want what is going to become to his body and his relics to become the subject of division in the church, to become the subject of argument. So he basically says, I would rather you took up my bones from this place than etc., than there be an argument. So when he dies, his followers, some years later, when the area is starting to be invaded by Vikings, etc., then realize they're going to have to leave this place and protect what is their most valued possessions, among which is the remains of St. Cuthbert. And so they set off literally wandering the Northumbrian countryside for more than 100 years, stopping off at various points on the way, carrying a coffin. Well, that is the most doom metal thing I've ever heard in my life. Monks carrying a coffin, avoiding battles, trying to protect their relics, trudging around the windswept countryside for over 100 years. Just sounded like that is the most doom metal thing I couldn't come up with a doom metal story as great as that. And then once you start throwing in the legends about what happened on the routes that they took, and how the symbol of Cuthbert started to become the sign of protection in the northeast, that sounded like a great metal kind of story. By the time you throw in the fact that there are various stories of the coffin being opened to basically check the remains, and the coffin, the remains still being incorrupt, and that was always a traditional sign of, taken as a sign of holiness, that the body hadn't decomposed. So here we have like magic and legend associated with this, holy remains, and that's how the sort of the cult of St. Cuthbert started to become a thing. That people started to believe, well, if this body isn't decomposing, then blah 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 blah, he must be from God. So then you get towards the end of the story, you have the coffin refusing to move any further. That is one of the lines that they're trying to carry this coffin in. It just says the coffin refuses to move, and so that's taken as a sign where the bones need to finally rest. So they build a church there, and that's what eventually becomes where the remains end up in what we now know as Durham Cathedral. And then fast forward hundreds of years, you now start to have rumours about whether the body was still incorrupt, and someone setting out to prove whether it was true or a myth, and having the coffin open again, like 1,000 years later, and finding that they only found bones. Well, what do you know? So then the rumor starts that we see that's because that's not the real coffin, and only 3 monks know where the real coffin really lies, and so protects the myth of Cuthbert. So there's just all these great stories that just sound like a metal album. Like if you set about trying to write myths and legends around monks and dead saints and stuff, that is the story you would write. But as much as we want to believe the only text that we have available of what really happened, although they've been written by a guy called Bede, who was a very Christian character, and so was bound to put the Christian spin on things.
Sure.
Yeah, it just sounds like a great metal album. So, I really struggle writing lyrics sometimes. So that sounded like somebody had just done some work for me.
Well, I think sometimes as well, the art can be about anything. Some of the most,
exactly.
I think the fact that it's in a format of storytelling, I actually find that quite fascinating and interesting in a way. Because you're stepping outside of the school of, like, let's say, we're Manowar, Kings of Metal, and then, just like that sort of present thing, and then rather almost narrating a situation through notes and through music, which I think is very powerful. And I've become more fascinated with that, especially, as I've gotten a bit older. But in the case of St. Cuthbert in particular, I mean, there's a lot of very weird stories about that. I mean, arguably, I have done a little bit of my own due diligence on this, and, arguably you could say that his story actually, or just his presence in general, caused more ripples after his death because of the miracles and the crazy shit that was associated with the fact that his dead body alone was healing people supposedly, and then that's why people were saying he's a man of God and things like that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it always makes for a great story where we sort of tread the line between what is real and what really happened, and what has become sort of an extended version of the story, and like a fabrication and enhancement, depending on how far the people want to take it. But of course, how many times have we seen in history that whoever's controlling the message controls, how people feel about it and how people remember things. The people who write things down start controlling the historical narrative, right? So
sounds like you're talking about mainstream media, huh?
Well, how many examples could we take of this throughout history? But because Bede was a Christian. And he was writing down the tale of, so the book, for those of you who don't know, is called Bede's Ecclesiastical History of the English People, which is like one of the sole texts that we have of the early formation of England, and all the way through the Romans and Anglo-Saxons and so on. So his book, which was written, I think, around sort of 730. I don't really consider myself an expert on this. I just sort of research what I need to know. Sure. And he writes this book around sort of 730, which looks back on the formation of England, but he's writing this from a Christian perspective. So he is bound to position, the main characters in a light that is, that will carry favor with God, kind of thing. It in his beliefs, which is fine. I have no real trouble with that. But if we then just accept and report that as fact, and don't sort of question and provoke and prod a little bit and say, well, could this really be true? Yeah. I'm sure what's been really fascinating to me, as I kind of said before, is that I've had people respond to this album who are extremely religious, like modern day Christians, and thank me for dealing with the subject in a very respectful way, which is fascinating to me because I'm an atheist. I've had people ask me if I'm a Catholic because they've been so convinced by the telling of the story.
I mean, I can kind of see that. Like when I was listening to it as well, even I thought to myself for a moment, like, "Oh, is he?" But obviously, to me, it doesn't matter. You can be
Catholic,
of course not, or whatever. But I can see your point that there is such potency to the storytelling that you could think that, oh yeah, this is obviously like a very close thing to this person, which I think just speaks to how well you have executed the overall package for this album.
Thank you. But what's curious about it is I've also had people just declare that I'm right-wing nationalist. So I've had
of
both.
There's always those.
Yes. So I've had both interpretations of the same record, which probably means I've kind of balanced it just about right. But it's really interesting the fact that whoever's controlling the message, and having already recorded album 2 but being unable to say anything about it, there's a similar story in album 2 where whoever is controlling the message is we can't just accept it as fact. We have to sort of try and prod a little bit and go, well, if this is the case, then surely this, ask questions of it, because this was written down 1,300 years ago, and perhaps it should have been questioned sooner. Who knows?
Sure, no, I understand that, man. I think it's very interesting, just, like talking about the aspect of the miracles and obviously the healing factors and things like that. I'm a very open-minded person. I'm someone who always questions things, but I also believe in things that probably your average, like you said, atheist person would never believe, because they'd be like, that doesn't fall into this school of thought at all. But the reason for that is because it's down to my own personal experiences and what I've observed in my own personal life and things that I've experienced that I know, okay, well, that doesn't go with this other school of thought here. But then I still will question things, and still think that, okay, so maybe their truth is sort of in a gray area between some of these here. So I know that sounds a little bit cryptic, but where I'm coming from is that it's fascinating to me that we as humans, I think, whether you're an atheist, whether you're a Christian, whether you're a Muslim, whether you're a Satanist, whatever you are, sometimes we just blindly want to accept any fact as long as it sort of conforms to our own narrative of things.
Exactly, as long as it fits your narrative. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. This can be even a case of, I don't know, something related to like diet, like meat eaters versus vegans, The vegans will always have an argument that supports their claim. It's like, well, this is bad for you, this is good for me. And then the meat eaters or the carnivores will have the same thing, they'll be like, oh, well, actually, that's bad for you, and then this is good for me, and I'm not gonna eat anything else but red meat. And then there's this like weird thing of, like, as long as a study agrees with us with what we think, we'll just go with that, which is just sort of like, I think this sort of it very much unpacks how social media and YouTube algorithms and things like that work, is that we're constantly shown the things that agree with us. It's like, oh, you think this? Well, here you go. Here's more shit to make you stand your ground on whatever it is that you think. Never ever question.
Or alternatively, the exact opposite.
The exact opposite
to encourage the anger, the outrage reaction. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. So it's very interesting to me, because like, when I think of like the case of the miracles and the healing, that reminds me of like in Iran, we've got obviously Iran is not only is it an Islamic country, but it's a Shia version of Islam, and Shia is like it's pretty fucked. So like that's the one where on the
is that the official tagline of the religion?
That is pretty fucked. Yes. Exactly. So,
do they have that on their banners or flyers?
They may as well do. I think they should. I think they should be more sort of like
just save
honest
time
about it. Yeah, save time. It's easier to promote it. And so on. So with them, we've got certain different shrines to Imam Hussein, which was the third descendant of Muhammad. So it was the grandson of Muhammad. So Muhammad had his first son Ali, and then Ali had two sons. It was Hassan and Hussein, and all of them got murdered. And Hussein died in a supposedly very unfair way. And we were actually in the month of mourning Hussein's death, actually, funnily enough, and there are shrines dedicated to him around Iran, and I'm sure probably other places too, but there's quite a few in certain holy places in Iran where people will go to, and and it's always very weird, and people will go up to these things and then they'll start crying, and sometimes you'll see some kid on a wheelchair go up there, and then like 5 minutes later that kid just stands up from the wheelchair and stuff like that. And to an extent, I am a cynic, but I do find that stuff like that is powerful. But then, of course, comes the questioning of like, okay, well, what was happening here, But like, it's stuff like that I think it's interesting. I mean, I don't know. What can we learn about the human condition in general when we observe something like that? Or perhaps there is some degree of legitimacy to those experiences. What do you think?
I think maybe like sometimes we sort of have to face the fact that some people just want to believe in something. I mean, so I would consider myself, as I say, an atheist, but I kind of wish I wasn't. But I kind of wish that a religion or faith or some kind of spirituality had convinced me. And, you know, having spent my entire childhood around, in my case, Christianity, in one form or another, I kind of wish I'd been convinced, because, you know, maybe sometimes in religious circles there is like an expression of a God-shaped hole, where kind of like man has a God-shaped hole, and something needs to fill it. And I think that's quite, even as a non-religious person, quite an interesting concept. In that, you know, people want to believe in something, for good or for bad. And I think that sort of even taps into sort of the tribalism of like following a sporting team, or, you know, following a band that we love. Right. We want to follow something. We want to feel like there's this communal shared spirit that we can get behind. You know, so again, in the Northeast, I'm a huge Newcastle United fan, so I follow football really passionately, and, you know, genuinely jump around the room when they score a goal, and genuinely get headaches and almost cry when they lose, and because it affects me, some would say ridiculously so. But there is, to me, that is what I can get excited about. Like, it fires me up, and it plays havoc with my emotions in ways that it probably shouldn't. But I think it sort of just taps into the fact that people just want something to believe in. They want something to follow. They want something to come together and share. And whether that's a religion or following a sporting team, and some people will take offense at me comparing the two, but let's face it, there are some similarities.
It's a sense of purpose that I think we all require.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the concept of God-shaped hole is quite an interesting concept. And so I think that sometimes when we hear stories, and let's face it, pretty much every religion going has stories of healing in one form or another, and the power of religion or our God to fix problems. You know, if we want to believe in it, then it happened, and if we think it's a load of bollocks, then it's a load of bollocks. So I think it's a lot of it comes down to the individual, and whether we're able to, you know, I think some people are more able to place faith in something, and some people are more prone to needing some form of evidence. Like, so for example, when you said, you know, you feel like you've witnessed some things that and therefore believe, you know, evidence you feel like you've seen evidence, and therefore that has convinced you to believe something that you perhaps wouldn't have expected to believe. Then you have to take that as face value, and you have to respect that. So I don't mind sharing this little story. So when I was a kid, my dad was very, very ill. He had a severe illness when I was about 11 years old, called Guillain-Barré syndrome. Which is effectively a neurological disease where every nerve in your body disconnects, and so the person suffers very quickly paralysis. Everything shuts down. Can't blink, can't swallow, nothing. Your whole body just becomes like cardboard. And so a nurse has to like close your eyes on the nighttime and open your eyes in the morning. It's quite significant. And so as an 11-year-old kid, I was obviously terrified of seeing this happen to my dad. But as I say, I come from a religious family. So my parents, as part of their religion and part of their religious practice, every day read what they call Bible notes. So there is a section from Scripture taken, and there is like some notes to follow and interpretation for reflection or whatever. And so they no pun intended, religiously do this every day. So even when my dad was in this situation, my mum was still like propping open the Bible notes for the next day, so that the first thing he would see when the nurse opened his eyes would be the Bible notes for the next day. Now, of course, one of the crazy things, well, it's not of course, but one of the crazy things about Guillain-Barré syndrome is that the person who's suffering it is completely aware of what's going on, so they can feel everything. So all they can feel is like the intense pain of these nerves short-circuiting against each other, but they can't speak, they can't do anything about it, they can't tell you what they're feeling. But apparently, you know, now that my dad has recovered, He tells
Oh
us
wow!
that
So he recovered.
yeah. He walked out of hospital
right.
in 2 weeks,
Insane.
which is the story.
Okay, right. Yes.
So
I'm
now,
listening.
so medically, he shouldn't have been able to walk out of hospital in 2 weeks. He should have been in intensive care, 9 months, 12 months long recovery. Could have been permanently in a wheelchair. It can have a huge impact forever. Some people die of it. It's a very significant disease. So my mum. What we found out later was my dad, apparently for the first time in his life, bearing in mind he'd been a Christian since he was a child, decided that basically God had abandoned him, and it was over. He was done with God. If he'd been a good guy, he'd been a Christian all his life. If this was the situation that God had put on him as a good Christian, then that was just not on. I'm done with you. Like, get lost, kind of thing. And said he was done. And the next morning, when he woke up and saw the Bible notes, which of course he had no control over, seeing the nurse opens his eyes and sees the Bible notes that my mum had left propped open for him. The Bible notes said, "You spoke too soon when you said I'd abandon you." And in the night there is sorrow, in the morning there is joy, or something like that. Words to that effect. And he could wiggle his toes. That was it.
Wow.
And he recovered in a matter of days and walked out of hospital in a fortnight with help. I mean, he didn't just stroll out, but he was able to get out of hospital in a fortnight. Now, as far as he was concerned, as a Christian guy who'd been around Christianity all his life, and my parents will probably listen to this and we'll have an intense debate about it. But their interpretation of that, and I understand why, was, there you go, there's proof. God, Christianity, etc. And you can understand. I can respect that someone who's gone through something as significant as that sees that the next morning, and his interpretation of what's happened is a miracle. He's been healed. And by the way, doctors were running from all angles who couldn't believe it. Like, doctors were being shipped in to go, what's going on here? Because he was in such a bad way. He was due to be in intensive care the next day. He didn't know that. So it was a major turnaround. And to all intents and purposes, he's lived a perfectly healthy life for the last 35 years since this happened. So I totally.
That's good to hear.
that.
I'm glad.
Yeah.
I'm glad that
Thank you.
he recovered from that. But that's an insane story, man. Thank you for sharing that. Wow,
That's all right. I don't. Well,
that's really weird.
He shares that story regularly, and of course, from his point of view, this is him witnessing that this is what is possible with faith in God, etc.
Yeah.
Now, I have still managed to, only several years after that, come to a conclusion that religion just doesn't work for me.
Sure.
Now, that is what I find interesting about this how we are able to interpret healing, and to come back to your question about whether we want to believe in something or don't, whether we're the kind of person who requires evidence and still does. So I saw that happen, and I'm still, as a person, probably much to my family's just upset, able to go, it's just one of those things. He got lucky, because I just don't buy it. But isn't that interesting that we can watch the same thing happen and come to two very different conclusions?
I think that is interesting, but let's also look at it from this perspective. I think that a lot of times in this universe, what really counts is our actions, not just what we think or like what our opinions are of something. Because if you then really also want to think about it in action, you also went and wrote an entire album about a Christian saint and brought all kinds of attention to him. So arguably, maybe you did more for Christianity than your whole family did. So who knows?
Oh, wow. Now there's a spin on it.
There you go.
but yeah, but I know that because I've discussed it with my parents. In fact, interestingly, we performed a version of the album on Holy Island. I rearranged the whole album. You might not know this, for choir, because I professionally run choirs for a living.
Right on, yes.
And so we did a choral version of the album in the church on Holy Island, and that had to kind of get clearance from the pastor and the people who went to that church and so on. Mm-hmm. Very small congregation, and someone amongst the sort of church leadership took offence at one of the lyrics in one of the songs. There's no profanity or swearing or anything, but they took offence at the interpretation of the lyrics that they felt that I'd put on it.
Is it from the last song, maybe?
No, the first song.
Oh, okay, sure.
Because the song "Burden Foretold," where the lyric talks about basically that the monks had a burden placed upon them to have to protect these remains. Whereas, of course, from the Christian perspective of that might be that it was a blessing placed upon them.
Right.
Yeah.
I understand.
So someone had taken kind of offense about this. So I discussed this at length with my parents because they're very religious people and said, do you have a problem with this? Like, because I've tried to deal with the subject sensitively, and they're like, no, absolutely not. It's ridiculous. So I think it's really interesting that we're able. I always want to have respect for these situations because I think it's important that we respect, as much as possible, unless someone's doing others harm. Do you know what I mean? Unless there is direct harm. If someone just wants to believe that they saw a miracle happen, then I've got no problem with that. I don't have to agree with them. As long as we're respectful with each other, then great. If religion then starts driving, violence and persecution or whatever, then obviously I've got a huge problem with that. But
yeah.
I think I think we can be respectful of what other people's beliefs are. And I didn't expect this conversation to get so deeply esoteric and religious, but perhaps I should have known you better. But I think it's really interesting that we can take these different interpretations, and still, the world turns, and still, it's okay. We're allowed to believe these different things. It's fine.
Absolutely, man. I mean, listen, I can fully say that we're on the same page as far as that is concerned, and I think that sometimes as humans we sort of lose the plot by focusing too much on what other people think rather than just having strength
Absolutely.
in what we believe in. If you believe in something strongly enough, even if you're the only person in the world who truly believes that, that's okay.
Absolutely.
At least that's the way I look at it. And just one thing that I wanted to sort of come back to as well, because we briefly touched on this earlier, but then we ended up going down a rabbit hole of religion. I'm curious to sort of, get your perspective a bit more of an in-depth perspective of yours on just the topic of heritage, because I know that's something that's important to you. And as I sort of alluded to earlier, it's something that I feel sort of gets misrepresented or at least misunderstood. Sometimes for valid reasons, because there are also people who weaponize heritage,
Sure.
which I think is sort of, that's unfortunate, especially in today's day and age. But also, and that doesn't matter which part of the world that's coming from, by the way, just for the sake of clarity. But what's your approach and perspective of that? How is it that you're viewing this, that it's inspiring enough to you where you're like, when I'm creating music, this is the thing that I want to represent?
So, I think there was, springs to mind. There was a comment on the Arth Facebook page a few months ago where someone wrote, "I don't understand." Words to this effect: "I don't understand the concept of being proud of where you're from. I've never understood that." And I found that really surprising. I mean, obviously, like, there are going to be people with different viewpoints, but I can't imagine not being proud of where I'm from. I can't understand that, and that's fine. We talked about respecting different beliefs, but I think it informs you on every level where you're from, because you see the world through like the prism of where you're from, the people you're surrounded by, what they've lived through, what their experiences are, and it's obvious that they're going to pass on their experiences to you, because the whole sort of nature versus nurture thing of how kids are raised.
Sure.
You're always going to like have a starting point of how your parents were raised, or how your parents' life's experience, and their parents, and so on. So I think that it's wrong to be like blindly accepting of where you find yourself in the world to be the best. I think that's ridiculous. I think where this kind of thing falls foul is that when people hear the expression being proud of where you're from, they immediately assume that you're saying you are better than others.
Yeah.
And I, talk as a member of a band, in the case of Winterfylleth, who have a history of being accused of something that we're not. And because people hear words like heritage and words like, pride in the terms of national pride or regional pride or whatever we want to call it, like kind of identity formation, and assuming that that's immediately equating, I'm better than you. And what's infuriating to me is that I would consider myself, we sometimes joke about this, right? I don't mind telling you this, like Chris will laugh about this, or Chris from Winterfylleth will laugh about this.
Sure.
So we sometimes have like banter between us that Winterfylleth is the band that often gets accused of being something that it's not. And yet Arth, the name actually means my native land.
That's right. Yes.
Right. So if anyone should be accused of it, it's me, and Winterfylleth should just be, sent off into the sunset. So yeah. And so we have it like in jokes about this. But what's infuriating to me is I absolutely hate racism. Like, if anything is going to wind me up, it's racism, and it's not. It sounds ridiculous to say this. It's not even necessarily the concept of racism that irritates me. It's the just illogical nonsense of how anyone could assume that they're better than anyone else based on just where they're from or the colour of their skin or whatever what we're talking about. Because that's just inherently stupid, because there are idiots everywhere. And there are nice people everywhere. That's how I believe. I honestly believe there are nice people in every culture, in every country, if you look hard enough to find them sometimes. But there are awful people everywhere. So I think that we need to be like more mature about this kind of discussion, to be able to hear the notion of someone being proud of where they're from, and not just immediately leap down their throats and say, "Are you saying you're better than me?" kind of thing, which is just a ridiculous reaction. And one of the things that I think...
Sorry to interrupt you, but it's not anyone saying you're better than them. It's someone of the same race accusing you that you're saying you're better than someone else. Not them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Better than anyone. It's just a nonsense notion. But what's fascinating to me about it is, particularly with regards to flags, like how different cultures treat the display of their flags. So I really like a lot of the Scandinavian countries, like Norway, Sweden, and around that kind of region. And I've been on holiday to all of those countries, and I find it really refreshing how you see the flags a lot. It's like a symbol of pride. Or this is our flag, which I think is great. Likewise, in Germany, in certain regions of Germany, you'll see the German flag very prominently portrayed. You see the English flag portrayed in England. What is the first thought that a lot of people have? There's the racist, which is just bollocks. I mean, how did we end up in such a ridiculous situation that some cultures are allowed to show their flag and some cultures aren't? And I think it's sad. That's how I feel about it. I think it's infuriating and sad that in some ways some symbolism has been hijacked to such an extent that we can't just be proud of where we're from. I'm not saying that you're shit because I'm proud of where I'm from. I just like where I'm from. And that should be enough for me. And perhaps that's me being naive and a bit left-wing, maybe, or something, like, a bit liberal. But that's how I feel. I just feel like everyone should be proud of their culture. That's why I love bands who incorporate elements of their culture in their sound. Like, I love it when Rotting Christ do it, and all of the other bands we could name. Bands who've taken traditional instrumentation or traditional elements of their folk culture or their art heritage or whatever it might. That's why I wrote a PhD on it, because I'm genuinely interested, and I think it's great that other bands should be able to portray elements of their identity without being accused of being racist, because that just is just silly.
I think very, very well said, man. You can take a deep breath there. The thing is, I think that, first of all, the idea in itself, I've spoken to a friend of mine, Darko, on here before. I think it's simply a fact of feeling some degree of, we're talking about racism here. My understanding of it is that it's usually rooted in some degree of insecurity. So you're wanting to put yourself above other people without having actually achieved anything. based on just where you're from. Why? Because that's the most accessible thing to you. And I think that there's a difference between, absolutely, there's a difference between being proud of where you come from, and there's a difference between, as I sort of mentioned earlier, weaponizing that to put yourself above someone else.
Exactly.
So what is even the difference? So the way I perceive it, let's say, for example, if I wanted to make an observation here, I would say being proud of yourself is, first of all, understanding and recognizing that all of your ancestors and your grandparents and everyone who came before you, these were people who had to go through extremely difficult times in order to survive, in order to, they had to go through wars. And a bit further before that, even if you want to go all the way back to the hunter-gatherers, they were chased by all kinds of fucking wild animals and diseases. They've survived plagues. They've survived all these terrible conditions over the years as whilst trying to cohabitate with the earth, despite being tormented by nature. And they've made it thus far. And if it wasn't for them, you wouldn't be here. So that's how I perceive being proud of where you are, and proud of your own heritage and even lineage. Now, I think that if I wanted to take a guess, I would probably say that a big part of where this whole cultural thing of, like that comment that you mentioned that said like, oh, I can't imagine, how you could be proud of where you're from. I think that is mostly a result of abundance and just comfort, where you've got everything at the palm of your hands, and there's this sort of detachment, especially from the foundations of family, which is very important. Which the more I think detached you are from the foundations of family, the easier you are to just control as a person, the more of a consumer you become. And of course, this world is constantly trying to create consumers out of all of us. And I think there is definitely a very clear design to try and break down the foundations of family, like, for example, even to young people, or people my own age, saying like, well, why would you want to get married and have kids, when you can just go be single and enjoy the rest of your life, and then just be for yourself. And, there is, of course, I'm not taking away from the value of independence and individualism. That's great. But, there's better things that you can be other than that, rather than just your own selfish needs. And this is coming from someone who doesn't follow Christianity or Islam or anything. But I do understand that can be a very positive part of life. In fact, I would say that probably the best people that I know are people who have their own families, actually. And I think there is a powerful thing to that, and it seems to me like the world as a whole is shifting towards this direction of trying to break that down as much as possible. Now, someone could easily criticize this and say, well, Cheyenne, if you're so proud of where you come from, then why don't you go back to Iran then? What the fuck are you doing in the UK? And the difference is that the parts of Iran that I am proud of have nothing to do with the government that currently rules that place. And there is a history and a heritage there, but as far as I'm concerned, that country is basically hostage to this disease of the Islamic Republic. And does that mean that because I've left her, I'm now going to completely forget about the entire Persian Empire's history and things like that? And the fact that, and the likes of Cyrus the Great, and the fact that we were the cradle of civilization 4,000 years ago? Fuck no. I still, hold all of that very deeply within me. And I think anyone else who's in that situation should. So there is a very clear distinction between being proud of where you're from and then, like I said, using it as a weapon to put yourself above someone else just because you perhaps somehow internally feel insecure about your own upbringing. I think I really hope that especially the younger generation, I don't know what could even influence them of this, and I hope this for the for the younger generation in Iran or in the UK. I wish this for everyone, but they come to terms more with their surroundings and where they really come from, and their bloodline, what their grandparents had to go through for them to even be here today. Because if that semen wasn't passed on, they would have never fucking made it, and that in itself I think is a great thing. Just to conclude, here's why I personally think it's important to be proud of where you're from, because all human life, or all life rather, is a result of genes being passed down. So that in itself is you embracing the fact that you're alive, and therefore embracing life in itself. And I think I don't probably need to argue further why that's an important thing.
No, I can't argue with that at all. What's interesting to me, just as you were speaking there, I was remembering a discussion I had last year about the word pride and being proud. And I was talking about how I was remembering elements of my upbringing where there's this expression, pride comes before a fall. I don't know if you're familiar with that expression. And so I remember being taught that as a kid. Pride comes before a fall. And it was kind of an expression that was used to, tell kids that you shouldn't be cocky, you shouldn't be arrogant, you should be respectful of other people, kind of thing, which of course is an applaudable notion. But the way it gets presented is, if you take it too far, which is something I've had historical problems with, is that I find it very difficult to be proud of anything in terms of work that I've done. So if I was to talk about my career or anything I've achieved in life, I find it very difficult to say, oh yeah, that was good, that was really good, that was great that I did that. I find that quite difficult as something to be around. And so I was kind of challenging that as to why that was. And it kind of sort of through some unpicking came back to the fact that I remember being taught pride comes before a fall, and we shouldn't be proud. And of course, it's not that we shouldn't be proud in terms of how we're talking about it now. What that expression used to suggest was you shouldn't be arrogant. And of course, being proud of something isn't the same as being arrogant about it. Do you understand the distinction that I'm making?
Absolutely.
So I remember that, and what I didn't know until last year was that the origin of the expression "pride comes before a fall" is a Christian. It relates to a longer verse in the Bible, of which I couldn't begin to quote now. But it is it's cooked in that kind of notion that everyone should be the same, like we should look after each other, and even like notions like I remember being taught as a kid things like or you shouldn't want more because there are starving children in other parts of the world who haven't got that kind of imbalance, that we should make sure that everyone is okay before you want more, kind of thing. And I understand that as a sort of general sort of human notion. But I felt that perhaps it's affected me perhaps in the ways that it's gone too far, and that I almost now can't be proud of what I've done. I find it very difficult to do that. Right. So this notion that pride comes before a fall is sort of suggests arrogance and suggests like you're superior. And what's curious to me is that I've unpicked this in my life at the same time as I've made Arth happen. Because when the Arth album was made, for the first time in my life, I said, that's great, that. And I've never said that about anything I've been involved with. I'm always the person who picks fault with it and finds, oh, we should have done that, or that would have been better if that would have been. And I think, I'm catching myself saying it, even as I say it, I think the Arth album is great. And I love it. And I'm proud of it. And that has taken me to my mid-40s to be able to get through a sentence like that. And that's really interesting, that I think that there is a connection between how people are brought up in perhaps religious settings and this kind of idea of, are they saying that they're better than someone else? Or are they just saying, no, that's great, I'm proud of that?
Well, that's fantastic to hear, man, first of all, and congratulations just being an artist and even being able to say that sentence, because that's
hard, right?
Yeah.
That's hard as an artist, right?
Yeah, man, I know exactly how precious that is. That to me is the definition of success. Like I'll make an example. Like, I mean, this is kind of like didn't mention this earlier, but just earlier today, the new video that we released for Trivax Azrael, it hit on YouTube. It's hit over 100,000 views. And,
amazing. Well done.
Thank you. But this is exactly my point that I was going to say is, right?
I know what's coming.
Yeah.
Like, even without you telling me, I know the thought process is coming, but yeah.
There you go. Before we even released this video, god damn it, man, this is fucking, like, with artists, you already know what I'm going to say. But
Yeah.
to me, before we even released this video, I said, I'm proud of this, right? And I said to I literally said this out loud to the people in my band, I don't reveal those kind of private conversations on here often, but I think this is very relevant. I turned around and I said, listen, even if fucking only like 100 people watch it, whatever, that's still 100 people. As an artist, I'm very fucking proud of what we have all achieved, because it's a successful expression. I can watch that video and the single and the lyrics and the message and the timing of it coming out, because it was actually also a nod to the to those ceremonies relating to the third descendant of Muhammad that I mentioned, which the people who have seen the video will know about. Basically, we sort of recreated that, but we sort of inversed it a little bit naughty. And I thought to myself that as an artist, this is something that I can stand behind every millisecond of it, because I know that I fucking meant it, and especially I think when you know that as a creator of something that's especially so volatile, the fact that that you executed your sense of vitriol and contempt towards certain things in such a successful way, that in itself is what success is in arts. Not how many people watch it, not how many ticket sales you have, but simply the fact that you can stand by it and say, I am proud of this. So, to your point, that is the definition of success in art. And I can completely understand where it is that you're coming from with that. And that's how I feel today as well. So I guess we have that feeling in common, and it's a beautiful thing, isn't it?
Absolutely. I hold... I'll forever be grateful to my friend Dan Kapp, the ex-guitarist in Winterfylleth, who also has his band Horsemen, and he, a good friend of mine, and he chivied me for several years, make an album, because he just felt that there was a frustration in me that I'd never quite made an artistic vision that was exactly my own. I love being in Winterfylleth, like my brothers, and I think we made some great records, and we're going to make hopefully more. But
I think on stage you're the most active member of the band, and you're the keyboard player.
Yeah, well,
I love watching you with those guys, man.
someone said to me 25 years ago, you play headbanging keyboards, so yeah, why not? But yeah, no, I just wanted to do something that was my own, my little sort of baby kind of thing. And Dan was the one who was like chivvying me, like, just do it. Just like, it doesn't matter whether you think it's going to be successful or anyone else will like it. Just do it as you wish it to be. And I really approached art with a very sort of pure starting point. Like, I'm going to ignore anyone else's opinion on this unless I really think it's worth it. I'm going to do so. And let's face it, it's a ridiculously niche project. Like a doom metal band with loads of pianos on it, loads of cello, endless vocal harmonies, no extreme vocals whatsoever, about a region of a country that most people haven't heard of, about a Christian saint. Like, I couldn't have made it less commercially appealing if I tried. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
But I love it. I love it. And that's why I'm having so much fun with it. I'm like a kid at Christmas. I just keep saying yes to things. And now I've done another one, and I can't wait for people to hear it.
I can see that, man. That's so fucking refreshing. And I have to ask you, tell us about that gig that you did in Huddersfield Town Hall, because that just looked fucking insane. I'm kind of gutted that I couldn't make it there. I remember specifically clashed with something. I can't remember what, but that looked totally insane. You had what do you want to call it? An organic doom metal show, right?
We called it Organic Doom. Yeah. So basically,
because there was an organ.
Yeah, a pipe organ, like a real massive one that is literally ginormous, like the size of the building. And so,
fucking cool.
I'd been approached last year by a guy called Mark Deeks from Huddersfield University, who's a friend of the band, and he'd said, there's this project going on where people are concerned that the art of playing pipe organ might be dying. It's not really very cool. It's not really a young person's thing. It's very classical in nature, and they want to put the pipe organ in front of a new audience. And I've proposed that art is perfect for that to happen. I was like, yeah, right, okay, brilliant. So he said, would you like to do the album in Huddersfield Town Hall with a live pipe organ? And I said, well, clearly that would be utterly amazing, but no one's going to pay for that because, of course, that's not something you can just do cheaply. And so, long story short, he said, no, I think we can apply for some funding because the organ organisation want to make it happen. We think there's funding there. So I really forgot about it for about 6 months, and then sure enough, the phone call came and said, yeah, we've got the funding. Do you want to do it? I thought, yeah, great. So basically, we got paid. Not very much money, a little bit, but the fact that it was a little bit.
The fact that it didn't cost you thousands to do
it
is
exactly
impressive.
Yeah. Well, exactly. To go and play Huddersfield Town Hall, which actually holds 1,200 people. I mean, the room is far too big. Because let's face it, we're a niche doom band that no one's heard of. In Huddersfield on a Monday night. I mean, it couldn't have made it any more difficult to try and get an audience there. But yeah, the guy who was the organist was called David Pipe. Well, I mean, you just couldn't have wished for a better name band. I mean, we just couldn't stop laughing at every stage of this project. And he was a lovely guy. And what was great about it is, like, he comes from a very sort of classical background, excellent organist, well-regarded organist, but is open-minded to go, yeah, come on. He just wanted me to teach him about doom metal. Like, so tell me, like, how can this work? Like, is there kind of context for this in other bands? So I was explaining to him about the history of doom and bands like Skepticism or whatever. And so he was really up for it and making it happen. And then when Mark Marnett said to me, oh, would you like Aaron Stainthorpe from My Dying Bride to narrate the show? I was like, well, he's never going to do that. He's far too famous to do such a thing. And he did. Like, bless him. Like, what a lovely guy. So there I was watching sort of one of my favourite doom metal vocalists narrate my music. I mean, when does a metal gig have a narrator? Full stop. Let alone a very, very famous one. In a venue, a huge venue with a massive pipe organ behind you, and yeah, the whole thing was just surreal. And we got 300 people there.
Fuck, that's great. That's cool as fuck, man.
Ridiculous. Like I said at the start, if we get 100 people to this, it'll be a miracle.
Yeah.
And we got 300 there. And Pantheist played as well, who are another great doom band.
Yeah.
Costas' band, who Costas plays piano in the live lineup with Arth. So yeah, I mean, ridiculous. And it's literally in the last 2 weeks been on Radio 4, BBC National Radio 4, talking about it. There was an article in the Observer and the Guardian about it. Metal bands saving pipe organs. It's just hilarious. The whole thing is hilarious. But I'm having so much fun.
Honestly, man, it really makes me happy to hear that, and that's fantastic. I mean, quite an achievement. I mean, it sounds like just since releasing this album, and like you said, just from that little change in perspective that you had, which then led to the release of the album, which has now led to all these crazy fucking things that obviously you were it's not like it's your first round of like going to places and doing things with Winterfylleth, but now you get to do it with your own music, and it's fascinating to watch that, and it's very refreshing, and it makes me happy as well. And just a quick little point as well, like when you're saying in the case of Aaron from My Dying Bride and him being famous, yes, he is famous, but I would say that that's not even the important part, because arguably there are other people that are way more famous, or like especially in like other genres outside of metal.
Sure.
Way more, like not even comparable. But it's not about that. It's about his character. It's his status in My Dying Bride. How many years he's put into doing this, and how many years his voice has accompanied, my own included, when I was like 14, 15 years old, listening to that band back home and just being like, wow, this is pure fucking emotion. This is like not many other bands that sound like this. And, it's, that's cool as fuck. That's really refreshing. I love a story like that.
From his region as well, because he's just from down the road.
He is.
So that's
that's
it's like
right.
the birthplace of Doom.
Yes.
It's just crazy to have done that in Huddersfield. But he was so accommodating and so enthusiastic about the project, and he brought, bless him, his daughter came to see the show, and he introduced me to her before the show, and I was like, I've been buying your dad's records longer than you've been alive. How crazy is this?
Yeah,
That was
it
lovely.
is, man.
A really enjoyable night.
What does it feel like being on stage and then having a giant fucking pipe organ behind you? What's the sound dynamics like? Tell us a little bit about the details of that.
So that was one of the craziest things. So we assumed that we might have a problem in the pipe organ being too loud, and in fact,
causing
it was
like
the opposite.
feedback and stuff, right?
In fact, it was the opposite.
All right.
It was really difficult to get the organ to be heard over the band, despite the fact we made all kinds of allowances that we wouldn't normally do. But yeah, we fought our way through it, and because we recorded it as well, and so yeah, we've got a full recording of it, which hopefully will see the light of day in some form before too long. So yeah, it's really great to have captured it.
Well, so like a video recording or an audio recording you did for it?
I'm not sure that I'm allowed to say that yet.
I see. Cool.
We might have recordings of it.
That's fantastic, man. I really fucking hope that you do. Even if it's just like I don't know, even if you're gonna release it on vinyl, that would still be a pretty cool thing to get, because, like I said, I guess that's kind of it's a little bit of a piece of history now. Even though it's sort of contemporary, that's a very unique occasion that I'm very glad that you guys made happen and also captured it too.
Yeah, crazy. We've had people from other parts since the sort of mainstream press on Radio 4 and The Guardian about it. We've had lots of people get in touch, like, could you come and do it with our organ kind of thing. It is a slightly surreal experience for a doom metal musician to be in, but yeah, it's good fun.
But it's the fact that you've done it on your first album. I mean, you only released
that is crazy.
You only released Take Up My Bones, last year? And look, I mean, how much has that changed your life just since last year?
Yeah, February 22 it came out. So it's only been out like 18 months.
Yeah.
And it's been crazy. Like I say, I've kind of had the attitude of just keep saying yes to projects and seeing where it takes us. We've already done a choir version of it. We've done a version with an organ. We've got the Arth Lindisfarne Mead partnership, where we have the official Arth bottles of mead made on Holy Island.
Yeah, I saw that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's just crazy. What's lovely is people from so many different walks of life and backgrounds and musical contexts are getting something out of it. So people who would never have listened to a metal record in their lives are getting something out of it. People who are religious are getting something out of it. People who are fiercely non-religious are getting something out of it and can just sort of lose themselves in the story and the emotion of it. And playing live on black metal bills
that's right, yeah.
With a band that's got no blast beats, no aggressive vocals whatsoever, and getting away with it.
Yeah, I was surprised that you guys. I was very, very impressed that you guys didn't get booed off stage in Manchester after we had played. So that was pretty. That was like that was my first sign of respect. It's like, all right, yeah, they pulled this off. That's good. If I may sound extremely arrogant and full of myself,
absolutely
but yeah,
fine
no.
by me. Do it.
Yeah, no, you guys did fantastic. I've seen you 2 or 3 times now, and it's like it's a good energy. It's nice, for anyone who's not seen Arth before. It's nice just to come and stand in a crowd and just sort of close your eyes and just let that wall of sound wash over you and just take in the melodies and not think about what's coming next. Just sort of take it in. Obviously, if you already know the material, then you sort of have an idea of what's coming, but just you can lose yourself in it, and it has that very much almost Pink Floyd-ish sort of trance-like structure to the songs, where you can just kind of lose yourself into it and just let the song sort of take over the experience.
That's what you sort of see from the stage. You sort of see a lot of people with their eyes closed and just letting it wash over. Yeah. And some people are sort of getting into it, but it's so slow. Like, what can you do?
Yeah.
So, I mean, what was great, where we played Manchester a few weeks ago with Stormkeep and Winterfylleth and Ninkasag and Sour and Nemerus and Cairns. There were people like singing along, And that's always like a really special moment as an artist, isn't it? When you see people singing along your lyrics. But what really struck me about that, there were people like looking really almost emotional about it, singing about a Northumbrian saint who clearly aren't from Northumbria, and
nor Christians.
That's really, yeah, exactly, and that's really cool. They're immersed in the story enough to feel like they can get into it without necessarily having that connection. I mean, how many times have we watched bands from different parts of the world? Like, I don't know, like if you watched, I don't know, like Vindier, for example, if you'd been ever lucky enough to see Vindier or Vride live, where I wasn't, but you see people watching them, and they're not from Norway or they're not from that region, but they still like feel it somehow.
Yeah,
I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Windier, you listen to that band and you just want to put on a jacket, and it's I know what you're saying, but that's the purpose of art. That's what happens, and that's what's so special and beautiful about it. It's not about how many people get to discover it, but rather about the potency of the connection that you make with the listener with your art. And I think the more honest that creation is, the more it comes from the heart, the more you can create a connection. And not always for the sake of making a connection either. It's just about expressing yourself. But then I sort of view it as like it's a buffet that the bypassers can come and help themselves to if they wish. That's how I observe.
I like it.
Yeah,
I'll take that.
Yeah, and I think one of the very interesting things is that, when it comes to the relatability that other people will find with your music, it's always the emotion, So, for example, you might have written an album that's about the story of Saint Cuthbert, which is obviously, as we already said, very fascinating story anyway. And it captures the vibe of England. I'm sure in Northumbria very well. I think, someone could listen to that and they might be going through something in their own life that might not even have anything to do with the story, but they'll still be able to find a place of being able to relate to the music because that music accommodates them perfectly to their own current life experiences. This can be something as mundane as, I don't know, just having a shitty day at work. Or it can be something like, I don't know, going through a breakup. But then you come and listen to this, and then that sort of, those emotions sort of comfort you, or they almost somehow allow you to process certain things. And I think to be able to create something like that as an artist, it takes a lot. But I also think it takes a lot of the soul searching to be able to execute such a thing. So the way I look at it is, obviously, it goes without saying, but the content of art is highly emotional. Like Bruce Lee would say, the emotional content. That's I think it certainly has a lot of that, and I was feeling it when I was listening to it today. But I think that as an artist, even if you're writing about the story of someone else, you still have to have that emotional capacity yourself in order to be able to pull it off. Almost from a point of empathy, because we always view the world through our own scope and through our own range of experiences. So you need to have that level of emotional capacity in order to be able to project something like that, even if in your story you're making it about someone else who existed in 600 AD. Right? So for you personally, have you always been someone who's had an emotional life, or have you always been an emotional person, or has there been perhaps certain events or things like that which has made you go down this path of wanting to create such a thing with your art?
Oh man, that's a big question there. I think I've learned that I'm quite an anxious person by nature. And I'd never really thought of myself like that until the last couple of years. But sort of trying to unpick some of the stuff I was going through. So, like, for example, a couple of years ago, well, now more than 3 years ago, myself and my wife, we lost a daughter, like, mid-pregnancy. And it was something that it became a topic that no one really knows how to deal with. Like how on earth do you talk to someone about losing a child? And when you're the person going through it, you don't know what to say about it. And when you're the person who hears about someone else going through it, you don't know what to say about it. It's just a subject that no one wants to talk about. And it kind of forced me to, I guess, like when anyone goes through like a significant life experience, you kind of start reevaluating what's important to you and what you want to sort of leave behind. Also, it sounds like really morbid about it, but like Dan, who I mentioned earlier, when he was encouraging me to make the record, kept saying like think in terms of legacy, and the word legacy is always a word that sort of has got quite a sort of an emotional weight to it. Like it's gravitas. It sounds like epic and it sounds like almost you being cocky about it. I left my legacy behind, kind of thing. But we do. Like, what is someone going to say to you or say about you when you're no longer here, other than what you pulled off? And of course, what you pulled off doesn't have to be like I released an album. It could be like I was really nice and like helped my neighbor, or I brought up a nice child, or do you know what I mean? Like it could be something quite small, or not necessarily small, but everyday. It can be quite an everyday thing, like the kind of things that we do for each other, or the kind of things that how we want to be remembered. I think is, maybe it's just the voice of age coming. I'm in my mid-40s, and as you get older, you start thinking about this stuff. And the word legacy like really stuck with me. What Dan wanted to was really trying to inspire me to get off my arse and make an album. I think we do think about that as we get older, and I think that is what's important. And so, in terms of being emotional, I think that I was just forced to face that I'm an anxious person. I do worry about stuff quite a lot, and I'm a natural worrier to some extent, but I've found other ways to sort of protect myself from it. And I think I'd felt that as I got to my mid-40s and went through this sort of trauma with my wife, that the ways that I had found to cope with anxiety for earlier in my life were no longer having the same impact. I wasn't able to cope as well as that. It was kind of like the very large straw that brought the camel's back. And so now I really needed to face the fact that if I was going to do what I felt I was capable of, or do what I felt that was important to me, I needed to really pour my heart and soul into it. And I really needed to make a real authentic representation of who I am. And genuinely said to my wife, like, if this is the most expensive set of MP3s I ever own and nobody ever hears it, fine. For once in my life, I'm just going to make something for me. And that doesn't sound like woe is me, not from a woe is me point of view. I just wanted to make some music for me. Because like my professional life is making music for other people. I teach people to play the songs they want to play on piano. I arrange songs for choirs. I make music happen at weddings and events or whatever. It's always someone else's musical criteria. And even though I deeply love being in Winterfylleth, and is it to all intents and purposes a dream come true to be in a band like that for the last nearly 10 years, when you're in a band, there's always an element of compromise, isn't there? And that's fine. That's not to downplay it. I just wanted to be selfish for once. I'm making an album where I do it for me. And if no one hears it, great. And if anyone hears it, also great. And that kind of cliche rock star response of, we made this album, we think it's the best thing ever, and we don't care if anyone else hears it and anyone else likes it, it's a bonus. That was literally the starting point. And so once the Arth album existed, success. Done. So yeah, I am an emotional person, but the last few years have really forced me to face, this is what's important to me, and if I was going to do it, I was going to do it properly.
I appreciate you sharing that, man. I can't pretend to even imagine how difficult that must have been, and I guess still must be, to have something like that.
Yeah, I mean, so I don't mind sharing this. That's what the tattoo on my arm is. So, this isn't a very metal story, Cheyenne, but I can share it if you want it.
It doesn't need to be.
It's not very metal. So, anyone who's listened to the album, Taken by Bones, the last track, Only Three Shall Know, the melody at the start of that the guitars play, and it's also the last melody that you hear as the song fades away at the end of the album.
That's right, yeah.
That's the star coordinates of the star that was named after the daughter that we lost. but where the numbers of the star coordinates aren't. I basically said, what if the star coordinates weren't star coordinates? What if they were the notes of a scale? What does it sound like? And that's what that melody is.
Fuck.
So I get what music can give us, like more than anything, and so pouring myself into the music. And of course, it's not a song about our daughter Laurie. It's a song about a dead Northumberland saint. But my way of using music to cope with that was to go, right, I just want there to be a musical nod. You know what I mean by that? There has to be a nod somewhere. That whenever I hear that, that's that one's for you, kid, kind of thing. Do you know what I mean? And so that's why that's what the numbers are tattooed on my arm. And so when we play that song, that's hard, man. That's hard. But also really, really uplifting, like exhilarating. And it's probably because I don't know how to talk about it. I mean, here's me talking about it, but I like, how do you ever put into words something like that? And it's not like I'm the worst. You know, my wife is affected physically as well as emotionally, right? So, and millions of people go through these kind of things every day. So it's not like a woe is me situation. I don't want anyone to take that away from me. That I'm looking for sympathy. I'm not. But what I'm trying to encourage people to do is, like, sometimes there are different ways that you can cope with situations. You don't have to. You don't have to do anything major. Almost like I just like that's my musical nod to what we went through, and that's all I needed to do. And I will always be grateful of waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning having that idea. I don't know where it came from, but there we go. Perhaps that loops us back to where we started. How we interpret what happens to us, and whether it's a religion or whether it's not. Who knows?
That's powerful, man. Thank you for sharing that. And you know, like, I have obviously heard that song before, but I think whenever I hear it again now, that's gonna hit harder, because that was actually, out of the entire album, I kid you not, that's the melody that stood out with me the most, because it's the way it's put in there is quite unorthodox. So you sort of don't, it's sort of like it works it beautifully, but the way it goes against the rhythm part and the drums is a little like unusual.
Yeah.
But it works, and that's fucking powerful, man. Oh my god, I think that's beautiful. That's all I can say is that, you know, there's a lot I think people could learn from that. There's a lot, and you know, like, I didn't expect. I said this during, I think, when I was asking this question first. I didn't, you know, I wasn't anticipating going down such a path. But I even said that as an artist, you have to have that emotional capacity of a certain thing, even if it is someone else that you're singing about. So that I think that now makes perfect sense. And I think that you know, the stuff like that can be always very difficult in life, because you can always look at it from the perspective of, like, you're right, it's very hard to talk about it, and that can be about anything as well. And that obviously, arguably, probably being, I mean, losing a child is, I can't say I've experienced it. I hope I never will, but I offer you my sincerest condolences that you did, even if it was 3 years ago. But I also think that there's a lesson to be learned from that, you know, and it's that you can't, you could drive yourself absolutely insane living every moment of your life thinking what could have been, right?
Yeah, let me tell you, yeah.
And I think that could happen with anything, you know. That could even happen with something as fucking mundane as a job you didn't get, you know. Fuck it, you know. But then it can also happen with something like that. So I think that what a beautiful thing, and what a powerful message of, it's not even like you've come out right and said this, but this is the example you're setting, is that the message is to, regardless of what happens, you know, it's that you can make something of it. You can create something powerful. You have
to make it mean something.
Exactly. Yes. You can make it mean something. And then maybe through that you can make it mean something for other people as well. And then you can add to their life and you add to your own life. And I think that's beautiful, man, you know. Power to you.
Thank you.
And that's good. That's good. My respect.
Cheers, man.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, perhaps other people listening to this now as well, if they go and revisit the full album, that's the thing that I recommend doing. You know, it's not just listening song to like single songs, but if you listen to the full album and then when it gets to that part, then I think that adds to it, you know. Yeah. Fuck, I really want to see you guys live again now.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's good. So, I mean, I don't really know if there is much that to even add to that, you know.
No, sorry, I don't want to like derail a sad conversation, but it's not a sad conversation to me. I mean, obviously the story is sad, but the I don't want to get people down listening to that story. I think you've interpreted it exactly the right way. I had to make it mean something.
Yeah. I think it's. I don't think it's. Yeah. You're right, because the conclusion is powerful. The conclusion is one of love and also ultimately refusing to be a victim of circumstances.
Yeah,
you know
exactly
what I mean?
That. Yeah, exactly that.
Yeah, and that's why I respect that. I've always been about that, you know. And it's always one thing to say it, and another thing to, you know, actually do it and truly believe in that. So you know, because it's like just like you said, this might have happened to millions of other people, but still, to you, that would still probably be the hardest thing that's ever happened. That doesn't take away from it, okay? And by you being able to overcome it and create something beautiful and meaningful out of it, perhaps you can help other people who are going through the worst things that they're going through and be able to deal with their thing. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I'd like to think so, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Amazing, man. Well, listen, brother, what a fucking what a conversation this has been, huh?
We've touched some deep subject there for you.
Yeah, we have.
If anyone's still listening.
Yeah, I'm sure they are. The Iblis listeners are always loyal, so that's good, man. You know, and I'm sure so are your family if they're still listening.
I'm sure they will.
Yeah, amazing. So I think we can sort of do the professional home run here, and you can tell us a little bit, because you've alluded to this a couple of times throughout the conversation, that you might have a new release coming out at some point. Is there much you can reveal about this?
Difficult to do so fully, but I'll give it a go. So yeah, the second album is recorded, it's mixed, it's mastered, it's done. Very proud of it. Yeah, it's another story of the history of Northumbria, and we're currently just working on the final touches of layouts and promo stuff and all the components that need to get the ducks in the row before you can bring a record out. But hopefully, early 2024, there will be some new Arth music for people to get their teeth stuck into.
Early 2024. You heard it here first, people. And I cannot wait to hear that, man. Sounds very exciting, you know. And who knows, perhaps we might even get to hear a little bit of that show that you played in Huddersfield at some point. That would be pretty cool. Who knows? Who knows? That would be pretty cool. I'm sure some tape bootlegs might start popping out somewhere that people record on their phones.
Black market in Huddersfield.
That's it. I'll be the one selling it because that's my background in music. So there we go.
Oh, really?
Well, yeah, because we couldn't get proper CDs in Iran. So everything
course,
that I ever got access to was fucking bootlegs and shit. So
amazing.
How do you think I ended up hearing about Cannibal Corpse and Gorgoroth as a 15-year-old in the Islamic Republic?
Fair play to you, man. Fair play.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. So, once again, brother, thank you so much for jumping on the podcast, and I really appreciate your time, and thank you for sharing your story. I think it's a powerful one, and I hope that you will continue making the music that you're making. You know, I think it seems to be making the ripples, not just in terms of the numbers, but in people's hearts, and that's what really fucking counts. So, hope that keeps going. And to everyone else listening to the podcast as well, hope you guys enjoyed this one. We'll see you on the next episode.
Thanks, man.